Okay, so this story is about a weird man who was mysteriously slain in a hotel. This guy checked in without any luggage, never turned the lights on in his room, and was even mysteriously locked inside his room on multiple occasions. He was somehow hit in the head, slashed with a blade, and bound by cords. But when the cops came, some things just did not add up. So on a cold winter night in 1935, a man named Roland T. Owen checked into room 1046 at the Hotel President in Kansas City. The hotel staff noticed that Roland didn't have any luggage with him when he checked in. All he had was a hairbrush and a comb and some toothpaste. When Roland checked in with his concierge, he mentioned that he was from Los Angeles. He also told them that he went to another hotel at first, but it was too expensive, so he came to this one. I just feel like that's a weird thing to say, but maybe he was like a no filter, too much information kind of guy. It's kind of like when people tell you too much about their indigestion issues. Like, I don't need to know about that. The employees at the hotel guessed Roland to be between the ages of 20 and 35, which is a pretty wide range if you ask me. So the hotel staff also mentioned that he had a cauliflower ear and a big scar on his face. According to the hotel staff, Roland was a very odd guest. They also said that he seemed really nervous. His room was also very dark. He kept the blinds down and the lights off, except for one dim lamp. And one time, a maid came to clean Roland's room and the door was locked from the outside. The maid used her key to get in, but when she opened up the door, Roland was sitting in the dark by himself. Oh my God, that must have been terrifying for that poor maid to open up the door and find a creepy dude sitting there alone in the dark. I would have been freaked out. But here's the crazy part. The door was locked from the outside and Roland didn't have a key with him. So someone had to have had locked him inside. But can we talk about the fact that apparently some hotel doors locked from the outside back then? Like, how does that make sense? Roland also apparently stayed in the room when the maid would clean. Like, he would legit just sit there watching the staff clean his room in the dark. Like, this is just insanely awkward. The maid once overheard Roland on the phone saying, "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast," and kept repeating that he wasn't hungry. Roland, I feel you, man. Those hotel breakfast buffets simply cannot be beat. On another one of the maid's trips, she saw a note on the nightstand that said, "Don, I'll be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The maid also said that she took a trip to drop off towels and heard two male voices coming from Roland's room. When she knocked, one of the men asked who it was. She told him it was room service and fresh towels. And he said, "We don't need any." But the maid knew there were no towels left in the room that day. If they didn't want to be bothered, they could have at least have her leave them outside. Also, who was the other guy in the room with Roland? Was it Don? That's it, folks. That's our story about the missing towel. No, I'm just kidding. At 7 a.m. on January 4th, 2 days after Roland initially checked into the Hotel President, one of the employees noticed the phone in Roland's room was off the hook. A bellboy was sent up to his room to check in on him. Even though there was a do not disturb sign on the door, the bellboy knocked. After knocking a few times, the bellboy said he heard a low male voice say, "Come in, turn on the lights." Oh, now he wants the lights on. After making the maid clean in the dark all this time? Get this, the door was locked from the outside again, and no one was getting up to let the bellboy in. So the bellboy assumed Roland was drunk and ended up leaving. A woman staying in room 1048 did report hearing loud voices cursing on the same floor near Roland's room. There was also a party that night in room 1055. Man, this sounds like a jumping floor. So it could have been random partiers, or maybe Roland was the life of the party. Who knows? A little over an hour later, another bellboy came back to Roland's room, but this time, the bellboy used a key to get in. When he opened the door, he found Roland laying on the bed, naked and unconscious. The bellboy assumed Roland was drunk, put the phone back on the hook, and left the room. Why do I feel like the bellboy should have been more sketched out by what he saw? Dark stands on the bed, a naked unconscious man? 2 hours later, the phone was off the hook again. The first bellboy was sent back to Roland's room. He opened the door to find Roland on his knees and elbows, covered in red fluid, holding his head with his hands. The bellboy turned on the light and saw vital fluids all over the walls, the bed, and the bathroom. He went downstairs and called 911 immediately. Roland was still alive when the medics and cops arrived. His wrists, ankles, and neck were bound with a cord. There was bruising around his neck that suggested he was strangled. He had several puncture wounds on his chest from some sort of blade, and one had hit him in the lung. Roland had also taken a pretty big blow to his head. When a detective asked Roland who was in the room with him, he said, "Nobody." Bro, you were just clearly attacked by someone. He then went on to say that he hit his head on the bathtub, but investigators did mention he wasn't fully conscious when he said this. I'm just trying to figure out how this went down. If there was fluids everywhere, cords around Roland's wrists and ankles, and obviously knife wounds, that can't just be from falling and hitting the bathtub. And why would he lie? What reason would he have to cover for someone even when his life was clearly in danger? Roland was taken to the hospital where he passed away 1 day later. According to a doctor, Roland's injuries had to have happened 6 to 7 hours earlier. And he was just there in pain for hours? Also, I don't understand how the one bellboy didn't notice any of this when he came into the room. Or maybe the bellboy did it. Maybe he had a thing for the maid and got jealous that Roland was spending time with her. Well, the police were convinced that someone did this to Roland, so they continued the investigation. When Roland was first found, officials didn't see any weapons in his room. Roland's clothes weren't in the room either. Remember when I told you that all he had was a comb and a brush? The hotel soap, shampoo, and towels were also missing. Even murderers are ready to stop and be like, "Ooh, free mini shampoo." Officials found 4 fingerprints on the phone that were not a match for Roland or any of the hotel staff. Based on the size of the fingerprints, investigators believe they belonged to a woman. Since Roland said he was from Los Angeles, when he first checked in, Kansas City officers contacted the police department there, but they had no record of a man named Roland T. Owen. What? So who is this man? If I was ever on the run, I'd go by a cooler name than just Roland. I'd be like Jerome Johnson Killface Jr. or something like that. A picture of Roland was published in newspapers around the area with the heading, "Do you recognize this man?" His body was also put on display at the funeral home. On display? Who does that? Tons of people started calling in saying that they thought they saw Roland, knew who he was, and even some people thought that the man was one of their missing family members. But officials were left high and dry when none of the leads panned out. He was supposed to be laid to rest in Kansas City Potter's Field, which is basically a common grave where unidentified people are buried. But someone called the funeral home and said they'd send the money for a proper burial. A few weeks later, the money was mailed in a rolled up newspaper from an unknown sender. Seriously, this case has a pulse again. Who could be this anonymous donor? The funeral home also received flowers that were ordered by an anonymous caller. They came with a note that said, "Love forever, Louise." What? Detectives, get on this ASAP. Who the F is Louise? Where did she come from? Why is she in the shadows dropping love forever bomb? After the funeral, photos of Roland continued to circulate in the paper. A woman named Ruby Ogletree saw the photo and came forward claiming it was her 17-year-old son, Artemis Ogletree. She knew it was her son from the scar on his face. The police were able to confirm his identity with her and believed Roland was really Artemis. That's a dope name. Why would you want to change that? Also, I love how the hotel staff described him as 20 to 35 years old, and he was actually 17. Personally, I'd be super offended, but that's just me. Ruby said her son left their home in Birmingham 1 year earlier. She said she had no contact with him since then, except for 3 letters. But Artemis had already passed away by the time Ruby received these letters, so they must have been written by somebody else. They were also typed, which was weird because she didn't think that her son knew how to type. One of the letters said that he was going to be going to Egypt, so someone must have been trying to make it seem like Artemis was really still alive and randomly just gonna move to Egypt. Okay, this is getting really deep. At first, this case seemed really amateurish to me, like leaving behind all the bodily evidence in the hotel room and making zero effort to hide the body. But this dude actually went on to some serious organizational lengths and clearly knew Artemis's real identity and his family. Is this Louise's work? If so, why would she take the trouble to pay for a burial plot and send loving flowers? Was it Don? Officials later discovered that Artemis had stayed at the St. Regis, another hotel in Kansas City. He was apparently with another man at this hotel, but no one could confirm whether or not the other man was Don. After this, investigators followed a few other leads and pinned a handful of suspects, but they were never able to find out who executed Artemis and who this mysterious Don person was. Ugh, I need closure on this. I have so many burning questions, starting with Artemis's obsession with hairstyling and sitting in the dark. In the early 2000s, someone called a historian who studied this case closely. The caller said they found a box with the deceased person's belongings with newspaper clippings about the case. The caller also said there was something else in the box that was mentioned a lot in the articles, but never said what it was or identified who they were. Oh my God, I'm literally hypothermic with goosebumps and chills. Did the historian even call the mysterious person back? Hello? Well, after that weird call, nothing else had come up about the creepy execution in room 1046. But here are the most common theories. Artemis was attacked by Don, who worked alone. Artemis was attacked by Don, who was also working with a woman. During Artemis's stay, the hotel staff described a commercial woman who came in looking for a man on the 10th floor. I love that. A commercial woman just must be an industry term. This woman was seen with another man who some people thought was Don. It is said that these two people could have been in the room with Artemis, which would explain the female fingerprints on the phone and a report made about 3 voices being heard from room 1046. But I can't figure out what the motive would be in either of these theories. Well, another theory claimed that Artemis was cheating on his fiancée because the person who called and paid for the funeral said a few things that raised some suspicion. The caller asked for the body to be placed near his sister. The funeral director asked what happened to the corpse. The caller said he had an affair with one woman while engaged to another. He said cheaters get what's coming to them. When the floral company was called about ordering flowers for the funeral, the mysterious man said, "I'm doing this for my sister." So based on these 2 weird conversations, some people thought that Artemis cheated on his girl, was taken out by someone for doing so. I also saw another theory on Wikipedia that said that this attack could have been related to the mafia, but there wasn't much else to back it up. Well, actually, everything about this whole story is sketchy. First off, who wrote the letter that said Artemis was going to be going to Egypt after he had already passed away? Also, I'm still super confused about why the guy just sat in his hotel room while the lights were off, while the maid cleaned. Who does that? I don't know, but I do know that I'm hungry. Now, this case may not have closure, but I do have closure on the cinnamon rolls. Thanks for watching.